Call came in at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. I know the exact time because I was still at my desk, going over acquisition documents for a logistics company we were buying out of Savannah. 3 years of building Harmon Defense Solutions from a two-man consulting firm into a regional contractor worth north of $400 million, and I still couldn't make myself leave the office before midnight. Old habits. When you spend 8 years as a Navy SEAL, you stop expecting sleep to come easy. My phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. Georgia area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. I don't know why I picked up. Maybe because something in my chest went tight the second I saw that number. Maybe because the body knows things the mind hasn't caught up to yet. Is this? A pause. A breath. Then a voice, young male, cracked at the edges like he was trying to hold something together and barely managing. Is this Marcus Harmon? It is. Who's this? Another pause. I heard traffic in the background. Wind. Whoever this kid was, he was outside. My name is Jonah. I think he stopped, started again. I think you might be my father. I sat very still. I'd been in firefights in 3 countries. I've held a tourniquet on a man's leg for 40 minutes waiting for medevac. I've done things I will never put into words. None of it prepared me for the silence that followed that sentence. Where are you? I said. Brunswick. I'm okay. I just needed to... His voice broke. Never mind. This was stupid. I'm sorry. Jonah. I stood up. Where in Brunswick? I need to back up. 32 years old, you don't expect your past to call you from a payphone. Except, it wasn't a payphone, it was a burner. Which I'd understand later. You don't expect the thing you've quietly wondered about for a decade to suddenly have a voice in a Georgia area code. Her name was Alicia. We were 22. I was home between deployments. She was finishing her nursing degree at Georgia Southern. 2 months, nothing serious at least. That's what we both said. When I shipped out again, she said she'd write. She didn't. I didn't either. That's how it goes when you're young and stupid and convinced you're gonna die on the next rotation anyway. I found out 6 years later through a mutual friend who thought I already knew that Alicia had a son, that she'd moved to South Georgia, married a man named Roy, and that the boy was, well, the friend didn't say it directly. He just said the timing. I tried to find her once. She'd moved again. I let it go. I told myself it was the right thing. Roy was raising the boy. The boy had a life. Who was I to walk into the middle of that? I was wrong. I know that now. It took me 2.5 hours to drive to Brunswick. Jonah was sitting on a curb outside a Waffle House on US 17, wearing a Carhartt jacket 2 sizes too big and holding a paper cup of coffee like it was the only warm thing left in the world. He was tall. Dark hair. He had his mother's jawline and something around the eyes that I recognized from old photographs of my own father. I sat down next to him on the curb. He looked at me. I looked at him. You drove, he said. Yeah. I didn't think you'd actually drive. I didn't know what to say to that. So I just sat there for a minute and we drank bad coffee outside a Waffle House at 2 in the morning, and I thought about all the years that fit inside a silence like that one. He told me about his life the way people do when they've been holding it in too long. Everything at once. Not always in order. Roy had died 4 years ago, heart attack, 51 years old. His mother Alicia had remarried within a year to a man named Darren, who had 2 grown sons of his own and a very clear preference for their company over Jonah's. Jonah was 19, had aged out of his mother's insurance, dropped out of Bainbridge State after 1 semester, and had been working construction in Glynn County since spring. I found your name in some of her old stuff, he said. She doesn't know I have it. How long have you known? Since I was 16. Roy told me before he died. He stared at the parking lot. He was good about it. Said I deserved to know. Roy. I never met the man, and I owed him something I couldn't name. I wasn't going to call, Jonah said. I told myself I wasn't going to. But Darren's been. He stopped. His jaw tightened. It doesn't matter. It matters, tell me. He told me. Darren Coyle was not a complicated man in the way that dangerous people sometimes are. He owned 3 auto body shops in the Valdosta area and had a lot of friends who were the kind of friends you don't bring up in polite company. He'd been inside twice. Once for aggravated assault in his 20s, once for theft charges that got reduced, and he'd spent the years since cultivating a version of himself that looked, from a distance, like a respectable businessman. Jonah had caught him skimming from Alicia's account. Not a little. Over 18 months, Darren had moved $64,000 out of the account she'd inherited from Roy into a shell LLC registered to one of his sons. When Jonah confronted him about it, Darren had laughed. Said prove it. Said if Jonah made any noise, he'd make sure Alicia chose between them. Alicia had chosen. She told Jonah to move out. He'd been living in the back of a friend's truck for 11 days when he called me. I want to be clear about something. I am not a violent man. I spent a career being very specifically trained for violence, and what that training gives you more than anything is clarity about when not to use it. There's a difference between a man who knows how to hurt people and a man who wants to. I have never wanted to. But I sat on that curb and listened to my son, a word that still felt foreign in my mouth, tell me that he'd been sleeping in a truck for 11 days because a thief had stolen his mother's inheritance and turned her against her own child, and something in me went very, very quiet. The kind of quiet I recognized. Okay, I said. Okay, what? Come stay with me. Tonight. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. He looked at me like I'd said something in another language. You don't know me, he said. I know enough. The next morning, I called my attorney, a woman named Patricia Steed who had been practicing financial law in Atlanta for 27 years and who I trusted with my life. I described the situation without editorializing. She said she wanted to see the account statements. Jonah had them. He'd photographed every document he could find before Darren had the locks changed. He was smarter than he knew. He'd been building a case for months without realizing that's what he was doing. Patricia looked at the documents for 40 minutes and then looked up and said, "This is wire fraud. Possibly elder financial abuse depending on how we classify your mother's cognitive state at the time. We can go to the DA, or we can go civil first." "Both," I said. She nodded like she'd expected that answer. While Patricia started building the legal case, I made another call. His name is Ray Kettner. We served together in a team out of Coronado, and he'd spent the decade since building a private investigations firm that did mostly corporate work, but occasionally took on cases for people he trusted. I gave him Darren's full name, the LLC registration, the two sons' names, and the auto body shop addresses. "How deep do you want to go?" Ray asked. "All the way." What Ray found over the next 10 days would have made a federal prosecutor's career. Darren's 3 auto body shops were processing more than collision repair. 2 of them had been used, over a span of 5 years, to move stolen vehicle parts through a network that stretched from Valdosta to Jacksonville to Charleston. The Shell LLC Jonah had found was one of 4. The total amount moved through them across all accounts was over $900,000. 2 of Darren's closest friends, men who'd been at the wedding, men who'd eaten Thanksgiving dinner at my son's childhood home, were on federal radar already for a separate matter involving interstate transport of stolen goods. Darren hadn't stolen $64,000 from a widow. He'd laundered most of $1 million. I drove to Valdosta on a Thursday. I want to be careful here. I'm not going to say I went there to threaten him. I went there to look him in the eye. There is a version of the story where I did something I would regret, and I thought about that version the entire drive down I-75. I thought about how easy it would be. I thought about Jonah sleeping in a truck for 11 days. I thought about Alicia, who I'd known when she was 22 and laughing and had no idea yet how much her life was going to ask of her. I pulled into the parking lot of the main shop on North Ashley Street at 9:15 a.m. Darren came out of the office when he saw me. He didn't know who I was. I was just a man in a truck. He had the practiced confidence of someone who'd been intimidating people for a long time and found it easy. "Help you?" he said. "Probably not," I said. "But I want you to know something before this week is over. A financial crimes investigator from the GBI is going to call you, and a federal agent, probably out of the Jacksonville field office, and a civil attorney representing Alicia's estate is going to file in Lowndes County Superior Court." I paused. "You should get a lawyer today. A good one." He stared at me. "Who are you?" he said. "Jonah's father," I said. The confidence left his face the way water leaves a glass when you tip it. I got back in my truck and drove away. He called his attorney within the hour. We know because Ray had been sitting in a car across the street with a directional microphone, because that's the kind of man Ray Kettner is, and why I pay him what I pay him. Darren made 4 calls in 20 minutes to his attorney, to one of his sons, to one of the associates already on federal radar, and to a man whose name we passed directly to the FBI field office in Savannah. That last call was the one that mattered. The federal investigation that had been sitting at a slow simmer for 8 months moved to active status within 2 weeks. I don't take credit for that. The agents did the work. Ray gave them what they needed. Darren's own fear made him make the calls that sank him. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel something when Patricia called me to say the DA's office had confirmed charges were being filed. I was in my office. Same desk, same stack of acquisition documents I'd been working through for weeks. I put the phone down and sat there for a minute. It felt like something that had been held too tight finally letting go. Here's the part of this I don't know how to talk about without sounding like I'm making it about myself. And I don't want to do that, because it isn't. But you have to understand, I spent 10 years after the SEALs building something. Harmon Defense Solutions is real, and I'm proud of it. And it employs 240 people, and I worked for every single dollar of what it's worth. But the thing I couldn't build, the thing that didn't exist in any portfolio or on any balance sheet, was a family. I have a brother in Phoenix who I talk to 3 times a year. My parents are gone. I have good people around me, employees I trust, a couple of friends who've been in my corner since the teams. But the particular weight of coming home to an empty house is something you learn to stop noticing, because noticing it doesn't help. And then my phone rang at 11:47 on the Tuesday, and I drove 2.5 hours to sit on a curb outside a Waffle House. And now there's a 20-year-old kid sleeping in the guest room of my house in Savannah, and 2 weeks ago he came into the kitchen and made coffee without asking where anything was, because he'd already figured out where I keep everything. And I stood in the doorway watching him for a second before he saw me. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what the right pace for any of this is. I spent 20 years being good at things, and this is the first thing in a long time that I am not sure I am good at. But I'm trying. Alicia called me in the 5th week. I hadn't reached out to her. That was intentional. Whatever was happening between her and Jonah was theirs to work out, and the last thing she needed was me inserting myself into a situation I'd been absent from for 2 decades. I wasn't going to be the man who shows up 20 years late and acts like he gets a vote. She called from a number I didn't recognize, which is how I knew she'd borrowed someone else's phone. That told me something. I didn't know, she said, right away, before I could say anything. I didn't know what he was doing with the money. I want you to know that. I believe you, I said. I told Jonah to leave because Darren told me she stopped. I could hear her breathing. He told me Jonah was trying to steal from us. I believed him. I believed him over my own son. She didn't say anything for a moment. I know, I said. I don't know how to fix that. You call him, I said. That's the first thing. You pick up the phone and you call him. And you say exactly what you just said to me. That you didn't know. That you're sorry. That's the first thing. What if he doesn't? He will, I said. He's not built for holding grudges. He got that from his mother. A long pause. You don't know me anymore, she said. I know enough. She called Jonah that night. I left the house so they could have the conversation without me in the next room. I drove down to the river and parked and sat there in the dark for an hour. When I got back, Jonah was on the couch with the lamp on and his eyes red and his shoulders lower than they'd been in weeks. She's going to testify, he said, against Darren. She called the DA's office. I sat down in the chair across from him. Good, I said. He looked at me. Thank you. You did the hard part, I said. You kept the documents. You made the call. All I did was drive. He shook his head slowly, like he didn't quite believe that. I'm not sure I believed it either. Darren Coyle was arrested on a Thursday morning in early February outside the North Ashley Street shop by 2 GBI agents and a federal marshal. His eldest son was arrested the same morning in Jacksonville. The charges were extensive. Financial fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and several counts related to the stolen vehicle network Ray had uncovered. He's been in Lowndes County Detention Center since, denied bail because the federal charges carry a flight risk classification. His attorney is good. This will take time. It always does. But the civil case moved faster. Patricia filed in Lowndes County Superior Court and by the 3rd week had a preliminary judgment freezing all of Darren's accessible assets. Alicia's $64,000 and the interest that had accumulated is being held in escrow pending the full civil trial. She's living with her sister in Tifton now. She and Jonah talk on the phone every few days. It's not fixed. Some things take longer than a season to repair, but it's not broken the way it was. I'm going to tell you something I haven't said out loud to anyone. The night after Darren was arrested, I went for a run. I do that sometimes when I can't sleep, which is most nights. 3 or 4 miles along the river, enough to quiet whatever is running in the background. I stopped on the bridge over the Wilmington River and looked out at the water. I thought about Roy, the man who raised my son, who told him the truth before he died, who gave him the grace to handle it with more maturity than most adults could manage. A man I never met, who did a better job than I would have if I'd been there. I'll carry that for the rest of my life. I'm not sure that's the wrong thing to carry. I thought about Jonah sitting on that curb. 19 years old, 11 days in the back of a truck, and he still called. He didn't have to call. He could have disappeared into the kind of life that swallows people quietly. Construction work, rented rooms, the slow grind of not asking for help. Because asking for help is the thing nobody ever taught you to do. He called anyway. I turned around and ran home. The lights were on in the kitchen. Jonah was up, which is not unusual. He keeps strange hours, another thing I recognize. He'd made eggs. There were 2 plates on the counter. He looked up when I came in. "Figured you'd be hungry," he said. I was. We sat at the counter and ate eggs at 2 in the morning, and neither of us said much. And it was the most at home I had felt in longer than I could remember. I don't know how to end this except honestly. I am not the hero of this story. I had money and contacts and skills that made certain things possible, and I used them. That's not heroism. That's just having resources and choosing to use them for something other than a balance sheet. The harder thing, the thing I can't take credit for, is what Jonah did before I arrived. He documented everything. He held on to those photographs for months without knowing if they'd ever matter. He made a call to a stranger at midnight because he had nowhere else to turn, and he stayed on the line. Darren Coyle underestimated a 19-year-old kid who'd been sleeping in a truck. That's the thing about people who spend their whole lives intimidating people weaker than themselves. They stop being able to see clearly. They look at someone young and struggling, and they see nothing worth worrying about. They're always wrong about that. Jonah is enrolled at Georgia Southern starting next fall. He wants to study civil engineering. He drove me by the campus last month, showed me where the buildings were, talked about a professor whose work he'd been reading online. He was animated in a way I hadn't seen yet, hands moving, words coming fast. I sat in the passenger seat and listened. I spent 20 years being very good at being alone. Solitude is a skill like any other. You can get proficient at it, even comfortable. I'm not sure I'd trade those years. They made me who I am, for better and worse. But I'll tell you this, there is nothing in the last 20 years, not a successful acquisition, not a contract closing, not a mission accomplished, that felt like sitting in that passenger seat listening to my son talk about the future he was starting to believe in. Nothing close. I've been turning this over in my head for months now, trying to find the clean version of what I learned. There isn't one. Real things rarely come that way. What I keep coming back to is this. Darren Coyle was not unlucky. He was not a victim of bad timing or circumstance. He was a man who had spent decades treating other people as resources to be used, and he got so good at it that he stopped being able to imagine anyone pushing back. That's not bad luck. That's what happens when you build your whole life on the assumption that you're the smartest person in any room you walk into and that everyone around you is too weak or too scared to do anything about it. He was wrong about Jonah. That's the thing he never saw coming. Not me, not Ray, not Patricia's civil filing. Jonah. A 19-year-old kid with no money, no connections, and no roof over his head, who still had the presence of mind to photograph every document he could find before the locks were changed. Who held on to those photographs for months. Who made the call. That's not luck either. That's character. And character is built the same way anything real is built. Slowly, under pressure, without an audience. I think about the version of Jonah who didn't make that call. It's not hard to imagine. Plenty of people in that situation disappear into the work, into the grind, into the quiet resignation of deciding that asking for help isn't something that happens to people like them. Nobody would have blamed him. The world would have kept moving. Darren would have kept moving. But Jonah understood something that took me a long time to learn myself, and I learned it in worse conditions than a truck bed in Brunswick, Georgia. He understood that doing nothing is also a choice, and that choices compound. Every day you don't act is a day the other side gets to keep acting. Inaction has consequences just as surely as anything else you decide to do. I'm not a philosopher. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that everything happens for a reason, or that the universe balances itself out on any particular schedule. I've seen enough of the world to know that's not always true. Good people lose, bad people win. The timeline is not always just. But what I do believe, what I've seen enough times to call it something close to a rule, is that people who operate the way Darren operated eventually run out of road, not because of anything cosmic, because of math. When you build everything on deception, you need every single piece to hold. You need every person to stay scared, every account to stay hidden, every story to stay straight. And the more pieces there are, the more chances something has to slip. Jonah was one photograph. One. That was the piece that slipped. The other thing I keep thinking about is what it costs to do the right thing when there's no guarantee it's going to work. Jonah didn't call me knowing I'd show up. He called because he'd run out of other options, and even then he almost hung up. That took something. I don't have a word for it that doesn't sound like a motivational poster, so I'll just say it plainly. It took more courage than most people will ever be asked for, and he did it anyway. I don't know what kind of father I'm going to be. I'm learning. Some days I think I'm getting it right, and some days I say the wrong thing and he goes quiet in that particular way that tells me I missed something. I'm paying attention. That's about all I can offer, but I'm paying attention and I'm not going anywhere. What I know is that I almost let that Tuesday night call go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't.